Well, guys, we finally have a new Mario Kart, and you all know what that means. It's time to rank them. I've been playing this game a lot over the past 2 months, and I feel I am finally prepared to make an educated list on my thoughts. Overall, I think that this list is solid, but I definitely hope they add DLC because only having 30 tracks in the base selection feels like a slap in the face after having 96 total in Mario Kart 8, as well as 32 being the standard number in previous games since DS. But still, this is a fantastic output of quality from the selection of tracks, new and old. Now, to be clear, I will only be ranking the version of the tracks in Versus Mode and Time Trials, not from Grand Prix or Knockout Tour. I'll also not be factoring in the difficulty level or lack thereof in the tracks that will usually come from later cups. Most cup orders raise the difficulty in the track as they go. However, they completely threw this concept out of the window for this game, except for the Mushroom Cup. Those tracks are still fairly simple for the Mushroom Cup and therefore can be given some grace. I will not lower a track for being in later cups like Mario Circuit in the Special Cup. Most of the cups were much more planned around being a coherent layout within the open world rather than focusing on a natural progression of difficulty. But enough yapping, let's go. As always, we start off with the D tiers, and these are tracks that I do not like in this game and either should have been replaced with a different track or fell far short of their potential. Now, as we start this list, I want to say that no track in this game is that bad or has major mechanical issues like bugs. The reason that a track is lower on the list is just because it's not very fun or because some tracks are better. And in last place, we have Starview Peak. I genuinely have not found a track in all of Mario Kart that I dislike more amongst Nitro tracks. Nitro tracks being the tracks made specifically for that game, the brand new ones, not the ones they bring back from old games. There are obviously worse tracks overall, like Mario Circuit 2 from the SNES or Cheap Cheap Lagoon from Mario Kart 7 from the Mushroom Cut. But without taking into consideration circuit tracks and mushroom tracks as they are always super simple, this one has to be the worst. Let's talk about the good of this track to start. It looks nice. This is now the end of the positive parts of this track. Okay, here's the problem. Not only is this track extremely boring with zero interesting sections and a massive misuse of the water mechanic, this is the first look that we have of the water mechanics in this game, and it shows off this mechanic terribly. In this game, when you drive on water, your controls are a little more slippery, and you can bounce on waves and ripples made in the water to get more tricks. Great. I don't love this mechanic, but it has its moment. This is a terrible introduction to the water driving. All you do is drive along an extremely wide road with two jumps to do extra tricks off of. That's it. It's more interesting than just driving normally, but still, it's a terrible showcase of this new mechanic, and I wish that they had done more with it. On top of this, this track is once again a terrible representation of Mario Galaxy, which is trying to reference. You drive through the Common Observatory 3 times for 10 seconds in the whole track. The rest of the time, you drive in a big circle around it on a dumb, bland road. Plus, it makes the split roads with the yellow and green look strikingly similar to Ice Ice Outpost, which most people don't even like anyways. Just remember, kids, it's not plagiarism if you steal from yourself. This is a joke. Oh, baby, here we go again. Why did Nintendo bring back Mario Circuit 3 again? Why? Who is over there drooling over this track and begging higher ups to put this track in every single freaking game? It has only missed one game, that being Mario Kart 7, since it was first returned as a retro track in Mario Kart Wii in 2008. It was in Wii, it was in 8 Deluxe, it was in Tour, and now it's here. Why? This track is a combination of Mario Circuit 1, 2, and 3 from the SNES. Now, this is not a terrible idea at all. If you had to bring back these tracks, this is how I would definitely want you to do it. But not only did they still not use Mario Circuit 4, which would make it way better because those tracks had never returned before, and would have made the track a much better length because now you can drive the whole thing in like a minute and a half easily. On top of that, they could have combined other circuit tracks from different games. They should have combined Wii Luigi Circuit, GCN Luigi Circuit, and GBA Luigi Circuit For one celebration of the good Luigi circuit, instead of the same tracks with small differences. Plus, because the track is here, they did not even attempt to create their own Mario Circuit. Now, nobody likes Mario Circuits, I'm aware of that, but they could definitely do way better than just smashing three tracks together. It's better than Starview Peak because you can do several cuts through the sand with mushrooms, and it's fun to race with 24 people. But other than that, this is a complete waste of a slot. Next is Dandelion Depths, and this is another odd track. It's themed around the Wooded Kingdom from Mario Odyssey, although they never specifically say that. And while it has some cool elements like teaching you how to wall ride to get to a higher part of the track and shows you a much better use of the over water driving gimmick, it's still not special. There really is no massive standout set piece for this track. On top of that, it's not even that clear that it's from Mario Odyssey. There are some parts that look like it's vaguely similar to the Wooded Kingdom, but without any enemies or hazards that look like they're from the game, like possibly even the realistic looking T-Rex. You could have easily just told me that this was the forest world from Sonic Colors, and I would not be able to tell the difference. There's just nothing really in this track that stands out. The ending portion is very anticlimactic as well. All you do is drive up this almost vertical rock that looks just like Rock Mountain to do a small turn at the end. It's definitely not a poorly made track by any means. Everything works as it's intended. It's just one of those tracks that's the definition of okay at best. You're not going to regret playing it, but you're definitely not going to be ready to try it again immediately. At 27, we have Crown City. This is one of the few tracks in the game that uses the gimmick from Mario Kart Tour, being multiple laps. And for what it does, I think it's fine. The first and second laps are definitely the most interesting. You start down by the beach and drive up a skate park, then get launched into main downtown areas. Then it just becomes a straight line simulator for the next minute or so until you drive to lap 2 and begin racing on the top of the building, which is easily the best part. So then you glide down and go through the same straightaway section for another 30 seconds, then make 3 lazy turns that they call lap 3, and you're done. While there are definitely worse tracks that do this formula, I can't say this one is too interesting. I do like how the buildings feel much more impactful on the racetrack compared to the other tour tracks from 8. And I love how much larger the buildings look. I will give it a little bit of grace because this is only the second track of the game because it's in the Mushroom Cup. But even then, it's not that fun. Oh boy, at 26 we have Moo Moo Meadows. Now let me first say that this track is not ranked as low as it is because it's a bad track. Far from it. The reason it's so low is we just had this track in Mario Kart 8 for the past 11 years. Bringing it back in this game adds absolutely nothing to it. My guess as to why they wanted this back so badly is because they wanted a farm track and because they want to add the Moo Cows as playable drivers. Both of those reasons are fine, but you could have accomplished both things by bringing back Moo Moo Farms from the N64 instead. Moo Moo Meadows is still fairly solid though. The biggest change that they made between this version and the 8 version is taking the ramp that used to be in the middle of the road and moving it to the side, and removing the extra boost jump in the hill section. They also allowed you to grind on rails on the fences, as well as jump off the cows if you could land on them correctly. Other than that though, it's really just the same track. I don't think it's necessarily better than one or the other. I think it depends on which game's controls you prefer. If this track was not already an 8, I would definitely put it much higher because the role of this track can be filled by so many other more fun and objectively better tracks. That just makes it feel like the definition of a wasted slot in this game. At 25, we have Desert Hills. This one just makes me sad. I used to like Desert Hills on the DS and the Wii, so I was interested to see if we could do something interesting with it here. But lo and behold, they did nothing but flatten the track. They took the jump section that used to be the best part of it and completely flattened it to where you can cross the entire thing with 2 mushrooms and end the course. It took what was already a fairly boring track and made it even worse. Really the best upgrade that they did is to replace the Super Mario Bros. 3 theming with Super Mario Land theming. Mario Bros. 3 is a better game, no doubt, but I like seeing Mario Land representation and this track being added to Sarasa Land, which is the fictional kingdom that Daisy rules over in those games, is a nice touch. The only other real improvement that they made to the track was taking the pretty uninteresting long section with the pyramid that used to have nothing but two bumps and some pokies on it and turn it into an entire dune section, replacing the pokey with moai statues. That was a nice change. I'm glad they did it. But other than that, the rest of the track is fairly mediocre. On top of this, they should have added dry ruins from the Wii instead. It has a far more interesting desert setting with the ruins, as well as adding another Wii course, which this game definitely needed. Or they could have added Yoshi Desert, which has not come back outside of 4, and the entire game does not have a single GBA track, which is extremely frustrating. Now we have the C tiers, and these are tracks I really just feel indifferent to. They're not bad tracks per se, but they don't do anything particularly memorable. At number 24, we have Peach Stadium. This track is very similar to Mario Kart Stadium from 8. It has an awesome cool gimmick where you can jump off of a section onto a much higher rail grinding section to then reach different shortcuts. Other than that, this is again sort of a plain course. The versus mode version of this track is definitely the best because they split the track into two pieces in the cup format, where one half of the track is played normally, but you can only play the back half of it, and the other one is only a freaking paperclip that goes on around the outside of it, and it's extremely boring. I really don't have too much to say about this course. It's very nice to have a track based around Peach's Castle, which has never happened. Closest we've ever had is in Mario Kart 7, where we had a Mario circuit that you drove inside the spiral for a couple of seconds, but that was really about it. If I had to give some critiques, I think that the track could be a little more experimental in its route, with the majority of the track just being turns and jumps. Nothing too special for it being called Peach Stadium. And for being called Peach Stadium, it doesn't really feel like you're in a stadium. It just feels like a road that's driving around the castle. The stadium vibes, for what they are, just really feel redundant because we already have Wario Stadium. Overall, it's not a bad track, but nothing special. At number 23 is Peach Beach. This is one of the oddest remakes of all time. They changed the course drastically because before, all three laps were just one main circle around the small beach area. However, they've changed it now to where the first lap does this normally, but then once you get onto the second lap, you drive around this little beach town that has been added. I wouldn't mind this idea if it was not done so poorly. The first lap is easily the best, but still not as good as the original because the interesting gimmick of moving tide is completely useless here due to the overwater driving. The second lap, you drive through a town with some cool opportunities to do some fun wall tricks, but the path that you do these wall tricks on is ultimately slower than driving entirely on the ground. The third lap is nothing special either. It is just driving around a big turn on water back to the start with some shy guys and jet skis to avoid. Not a bad track. Aside from the new exploration of the world and the fantastic visuals, can't say that I love this one too much, but it is an interesting change. On top of this, the entire theme of the Oceanside town is just done so much better by Salty Salty Speedway, which is literally the next track in the cup. There's literally no reason for the change to the second and third lap when the town aesthetic is covered by another track that also has the whole beach aesthetic, and it's explored there much better. Rounding out the C tiers, we have DK Pass. This is a track I never really enjoyed too much in the past. There wasn't really a large standout gimmick that made it super interesting, and this is by far the best incarnation of it. The other versions went for an almost desolate mountaintop racetrack vibe, where in this one, it goes much more into a chilled, laid-back ski resort feeling. This track has so much more life now that they've added this section with a jump and a little loop turning around into a ski jump. This is also one of the first to where parkour and rail grinding elements add so much fun to this track. The tracks before this were very fun, but they didn't use any of the new parkour and rail grinding elements, and as you'll see from now on, most of the tracks do, and that's why they are higher than the others for starters. On this one, you could jump off the ramp to ride the walls and jump off the trees to almost never touch the middle portion of the track. It's a little bit difficult, but it is a lot of fun. They also had the ability to jump off of this bend in the road to then bounce off the giant sign. Some people could say that the theme of this track is taking too much inspiration from DK Summit and its theming. However, I don't agree, simply because that track went for a much more extreme sports angle, while in this track, It goes for a more of a cabin mountain snow vacation vibe. As for a few more negatives, I would say that it's a bummer that they removed the snowman from the end of the track, especially when they already had the model in the game as an NPC. And on the intermission tracks, they even place them throughout the road. So it's odd that they didn't put them here. This track really has no big central gimmick that makes it fun or anything too complex, so I'll have to rank it here. At number 21, we have Koopa Troopa Beach. I know a lot of you expect me to put this a lot lower because it's just a circle at the end of the day, but I think having 24 players on this track gives it much more excitement. The beach vibes are way better here than they are on Peach Beach, and the vibes are incredible. It turns from a cozy beach vacation vibe to a rave on the ocean. While I wish they had gone with the baby park again, if they were going to go with the track that was meant to be very small and cramped to make 24-player chaos even more fun, I understand not bringing it back again, and making it a beach track makes it fit much better into the entire world map. It's a lot of those tracks that I enjoy for the most part. I think they're definitely better choices. At number 20, we have Faraway Oasis, and this is an interesting one. The track itself is pretty fun. I like the savannah theming, multiple routes that you can take, and the insane rail grinding section that you can pull off. It also has one section that makes Yoshi Falls entirely irrelevant, as it should be. But obviously, the biggest problem with this track is that there's no animals on it. Literally, you look at any other part of this track, whether that be the intermissions, how it's portrayed, and Knockout Tour, or even the thumbnail for the track itself, all show animals on the track. However, there is not a single one on the entire track. It's a shame too, because it's been super easy for them to add a few giraffes to grind on their neck or bounce off some elephants. They have the models in the game, why don't they just use it on the track? Well, this is definitely a fun track. It's not one that I come back to super often. At 19, we have Mario Bros. Circuit. Now we have the opening track of the game. I think that this is hands down the best opening track for a Mario Kart game. It takes the circuit aesthetic and goes for much more American Western Radiator Springs vibe. Driving from this track to Crown City in the Grand Prix really sells you on what you're going to expect from the rest of the game. It makes you realize just how big this open world is. Beyond the theming, the track itself is also very good. It's a fantastic way of showing you how the grind rails work, because if you pay attention during the starting section, you can just drive on top of them instead of doing what the game calls a turbo jump onto the wall. While this is not very hard to do, it's a good way for people to learn how it works. The ending portion of this track also shows how many different routes you can take during the game. There's easily 4 to 5 different routes or combinations of ways you can get to the finish line, and just this one section alone. It even has a hidden shortcut near the very start of the race. Everything you can want out of a starter track is in this course, and I cannot ask for anything more. With that being said, however, it's still a very simple track as far as its route goes. So I'd much rather play the more complex ones later in the game, but for what it is, it's a fantastic time. At 18, we have Cheap Cheap Falls. Now we have a course that's actually growing on me over time. Originally, I didn't care for this track too much because I felt the water section of this track was far too difficult to navigate. However, over time, I grew to love it very much. The aesthetics of this track are also awesome. It goes for an ancient Japanese town set by the river that is filled with the fish enemies from the Mario games. This was a fantastic choice to add to the theming. I love the red and yellow and white color palette that they went with for the entire track. It looks really good. Once you get a hang of the controls, this track definitely gets a lot more fun. When you're on the river section, you go way faster and go through all the turns and jumps, and it feels really good to do on water when it's actually making you go faster opposed to driving normally. We also have some really cool turns and set pieces when you drive under the watchtower and behind the waterfall. It also has a grass shortcut that can be taken for a last second win near the finish line, which I always enjoy. It's a good showcase of how cool the water can be, but there are other tracks in the game that put that mechanic as well as the other mechanics of the parkour elements together in a much more cohesive package. At 17, we have Salty Salty Speedway. Speaking of a track that uses both elements well, Salty Salty Speedway is not the best, but it's a lot better. Like I said during my Peach Beach section, this track takes much more advantage of the oceanside town aesthetic. Makes you feel like you're driving through the Canal of Venice with the road split straight down the middle with a rushing stream. It's also a track that uses the parkour elements in a fantastic way. In the second half of the course, you can drive down a rushing river in the middle of the track, or you could avoid the water altogether by making several jumps over to the tops of buildings. Although I will say it took me some time to figure out how best to get onto these higher platforms, and it's still kind of a puzzle to this day. Otherwise, though, I think it's a solid track. The ending portion is not very good, though. All you do is drive on another massive turn on water, which, as we have seen, is not very fun. The best part about the ending, however, is that you can use a mushroom to cut this corner quickly, which gets you out of the water and cuts the corner better. Also, there's a hybrid of a mermaid and a birdo enemy, which is an abomination of nature and it should be destroyed immediately. And now for the verse of the day. Proverbs 3:5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Now we're getting into the A tier tracks, and these are ones that I think are great in this game. They're not the best, but they certainly do a fantastic job of what this game has to offer and using it to a higher potential than the tracks lower on the list. And at the bottom of the A tier, we have Acorn Heights. This is another one of those tracks that takes the theming and the parkour elements and matches them together perfectly. It feels like you drove straight into a bug's life by jumping off of mushrooms, leaves, and vines to get to the end of the track. I also feel like this is a better way to do a track where you shrink and are part of a massive tree rather than Wild Woods did. The amount of insane routes that you can take just doubles every time I play this track. If I had to make some complaints, I think that the rail section on the right is a little annoying when everyone is trying to get out of the at the same time at the beginning of the race, and the ending section is not very interesting. Also, for being named Acorn Heights, it's annoying that there's only sometimes two acorns that fall on the stage. I think even if they weren't hazards, I think there should be a few more scattered throughout the track. At 15, we have Choco Mountain. Now, this is how you remake a course. I just said I didn't like Moo Moo Meadows bringing it back so quickly, especially with other options, but I could happily say that bringing back Choco Mountain 2 games in a row was a fantastic decision. Well, the reason for this is that they massively overhauled it to still feel like the original gameplay, but not only elevating that gameplay, but also adding to it by so much more. The original N64 track was a desolate chocolate mountain. However, they have changed it into a giant football stadium under construction. I genuinely love the theme here, not only because I love football, but how they took a bland and uninteresting aesthetic and making so much more out of it. The track itself is also very good. You have plenty of areas where you can jump off the walls, go through very narrow sections with 24 racers, which is always chaotic, and dodge charging Chuck the entire time. The one thing I will say the original has over this one is the ending section is not as good because the camera angle is not very useful for throwing items in the last section, and the mushroom shortcut that was usually used to win is much shorter and unhelpful now. The race is a lot less helpful than it was in the previous version. Another change that they made to this track and a gameplay change for Mario Kart overall is that they changed mud and lava where if you're driving on the track, you don't die immediately by driving into it. This is a fantastic change that was only made to a couple of tracks, and these tracks would be far too difficult, especially with 24 racers, if it kept the usual way of using it. When you drive onto them, if you have a speeding enhancing item, like mushrooms or a star, you quickly recover and get out of the mud. This makes it so that if you mess up in certain situations, you're not as screwed over as you otherwise would be. It gives you the opportunity to get back into the race and have a chance for the gold. Remixes like this one are definitely what I want to see going forward. They took a track that was remade recently that already portrayed the original incarnation very well and changed the theming and gameplay to make it far more interesting while still keeping the identity of the track. At number 14, we have the Great Question Block Ruins. This is probably going to be my most controversial choice. I hear this usually being one of people's favorites. Personally, I still think it's great, no pun intended. For one thing, I feel like this track is very disjointed from the rest of the world. It's way up in the sky and can only be accessed by this one glider ramp. If you were playing in free roam, the only way you would ever know it was even here was by looking on the map. The track itself is still pretty fun though. The number of different paths and crazy tricks that you can do on this track is insane. The theme is also very nice. However, I feel like the number of parkour sections that there are of this course they don't do a great job of making them feel necessary to take. On top of this, there are several paths that are not telegraphed well for you to be able to read. I also find it to be a fairly short track, but that could just be me. It feels like this track was made much more to be a test run for the parkour aspect of the game rather than a well defined track, in my opinion. There's also a very crazy shortcut that you can do on this. It's extremely difficult, and I still have not been able to do it. However, I will say, even though I'm ranking it low right now, by the time that we're done with this game after a few years of DLC and things like that, I could definitely see myself ranking this track much higher once I learn to drive the track better. At 13, we have Wario's Shipyard, and this is easily the best track featuring water in this game. There are plenty of moments where you can jump out of the water and onto the wall to grind rail or something else that blends together the water and parkour elements perfectly. On top of that, the waves that are made in the water lead to so many fun trick opportunities. I loved this track back in the 3DS, and I think it shines greatly here. The new ghost aesthetic is very cool, but that is the one element that I don't love about this track. It takes away a lot of the Wario theming and replaces it with ghostly atmospheres. While I love a ghostly atmosphere on a racetrack, it's made very annoying to drive through. Almost every track in this game has the ability to drive on it during the day or night. In my opinion, this is a track that suffers the most if you drive it at night, with most of the track being gray, brown, or turquoise. It can be hard to see exactly where you're going with less light on the. All the turquoise torches are very nice, but it's still a very dark track. It's not unplayable by any means. It's definitely noticeable though in certain sections where there's only a few small barriers keeping you from driving outside of the track and just straight into the ocean where Lakitu will pick you up. Like I said, it's still perfectly functional and doesn't ruin the track by any means, but it was something that I found fascinating. Other than that, I love the ending section where they replace the gliders with the ability to jump off of the mast rope by grinding on them. That was a fantastic change. At 12, we have Whistle Stop Summit. Now we have one of the best rail grinding section tracks in the entire game. Whistle Stop Summit takes the best elements of Calamari Desert and mixes it with the game's mechanics. The entire race is to drive through a mountaintop train station, and this is the first instance in this game that you are able to use the rail grinding mechanic. The aesthetics of this track remind me a lot of Thomas and Friends, but specifically that one extra little movie that they had where they actually sold train building sets to go with the brown and beige reminded me of. This track is entirely built around the rail grinding mechanic, and it's one of the first ones to do it in the game. And it's done X. Not only is the idea of grinding on train tracks a genius idea, but the last third of the track is talking about rail grinding insanity. There's so many paths here that can make any ending of the race chaotic. There's even a small grass shortcut that we can take in for a last minute win. The rails through the entire thing is hardly makes it ever boring. I've heard people say that this track can be boring because whenever you on a rail, you don't have to steer or hold your balance or anything. Once you get on it, you can easily just hold A and drive straight for most of the track. And while I can definitely see where you're coming from, the two things I'll say is that one, if you go straight the entire time, someone can be throwing items at you and you can be way too predictable by just driving in a straight line. So it's better to switch up your gameplay and go from one to another so that you don't get hit. Plus, the second thing is that whenever you jump from rail to rail, you can not only get better routes in your lines on the track, but you also get a speed boost from it. So you're incentivized to take the different rails every time. All in all, this is a fantastic course and one of the best introductions to a secondary mechanic in any Mario Kart game. At number 11, we have Boo Cinema. This was a track that I was most excited to play when this game was shown off. Boo Cinema is a fantastic track and I love it to this day. The ghost theming tracks are always extremely hit or miss for Mario Kart. Sometimes they can be very cool, like Luigi's Mansion or Banshee Boardwalk. However, they can also be times where it's extremely boring, like the Ghost Valley tracks or Twisted Mansion. However, I think they made a great choice here in taking the ghost aesthetic and fusing it with something else, that being a movie theater. Driving through a haunted movie theater is genius, and while the idea alone could be fantastic, driving through the ticket booth into the theater itself, jumping into the large movie screen, and making a big loop around the film reel back out towards the entrance is a fantastic way to not only experience the entire theater, but also just elevate the idea even further. It's like you're taking the entire trip as if you were going to a theater yourself. On top of this, when you jump into the movie theater, it even changes the colors to be more drowned out and saturated to look more like an old Frankenstein or Wolfman movie. And while this effect can definitely wear out over time, I still think it's genius. The only reason this track is not higher is that the track itself, mechanically, is not very amazing. There are some grind rails that can be fun on the track, but other than that, there's hardly anywhere to do cool, interesting parkour activities on this course. Your normal driving experience is much closer to a circuit track rather than an extremely fun gameplay experience. Because of that, I'm going to have to leave it here. But yes, it is indeed absolute cinema. Finally, we have its grand return. At number 10, we have Airship Fortress. It is finally back and it cracked the top 10 on this list. People were extremely mad back when the Booster Course Pass was being released for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because we were told that we're only going to be given one more DS track after Wave 3 of the Booster Course Pack by leakers. It actually turned out to be Mario Circuit from the DS. This made everybody extremely upset that it was not Airship Fortress, not only because it's a fan favorite, but was already a tour, so moving it over would not be very hard. However, personally, I'm very happy that they waited to put it in this game. Not only does it look far more polished and exhilarating to look at when it would have been like in 8, but the added addition of 20 players and grind rails makes this track so much more fun than it used to be. I never disliked this track in other games. In fact, I've always put it in my A tier. But I didn't love the gameplay on DS, and Sevens was definitely a step up from the gameplay, but it was still not amazing. So I'm glad this track finally gets to shine in a game with fantastic gameplay to go along with the great theming and layout. From the grind rails at the start, this track isn't really too different from the original. Personally though, I don't really mind. Still a fantastic tribute to Mario Bros. 3 and a great showcase of 24 players gimmick because they're all forced into a very small area for the majority of the track. Several other tracks in almost every intermission can feel dull at times because the road that you drive on is far too wide. And because of that, the insanity of 24 players is rarely felt. I also love seeing this track in the daytime, which was something that was never before seen on consoles. If I were to say something negative about this track, however, I still don't like the spiral road near the final back half of the track. I find it to be a rather anticlimactic ending to an otherwise fast and bombastic track. Overall, I'm glad that they brought this track back for a new game. At number 9, we have Sky High Sunday. The improvements of this track have to be studied. The transformation from this track being one of the most disliked in 8 Deluxe to becoming one of the most beloved in Mario Kart World, probably one of the biggest changes of online discourse for a track or a character or something like that, since the Spot was changed from a joke villain to a major threat in the Spider-Verse movies. Literally every aspect of this track is made so much better than its last appearance in 8 Deluxe. The visuals actually look good, and the track is far more enjoyable than it ever was in 8. What used to be a dumb oval with 10 jumps is now turned into the Mario Kart equivalent of the X games. Almost every surface of this track can either be wall rided on or grinded upon. Out of every track in this game, this has to be one of the few tracks that almost have an infinite number of ways to approach one single lap. Some of the tricks and grind rails that you can use are fairly easily telegraphed to you. However, there are some that would not appear obvious at first, but once you see it happen, you want to race it again to desperately figure out how to do it because it looks so cool. In fact, I bet some of these routes were not even intended by Nintendo, specifically the final big turn. I said earlier about Chocolate Mountain that when they remake a track that they came back recently, if they're going to do that, they should change up the theme to make it more interesting. But this is one of the few instances where keeping the theming and completely rebuilding the gameplay of a track works far better. This is what I love from SNES Bowser Castle 3 from 8 Deluxe. It kept what the original was trying to do, but amplified its gameplay to its highest potential. In 8th place, we have this game's Rainbow Road. This is definitely one of the best Rainbow Roads ever made, but it's not perfect. Let's start off with the good. I love how this track is somewhat a combination of every Rainbow Road. The length is reminiscent of 64 Rainbow Road. The Rainbow Swamps are from the NES version, and many other versions are referenced here. This track is an adventure from start to finish, especially if you race it in the cup format. You start on the main road where you'd get a feel for the large bends and loops the track has to offer. Then you glide onto a giant space river type of thing. Then you glide onto a space station, which is far better than the one in Deluxe. Then you go back to the normal road that has now been enhanced by the new mechanics that they added for this track and Bowser's Castle. On both of those tracks, there are sections where you get a lot of extra speed because the road gives you an extra boost. Then you drive to the final section that splits into two paths where you watch several hazards and characters ride on a magic train close to the track. It all culminates in one final gliding section that can be determining factors between first and last place. It's always interesting to see how they're going to change the look of each frame of road, and this time they decided to go with a stained glass window type of style. Really, I don't have too much to say other than it's amazing and it's awesome. I do wish you had a little more difficulty to it, but the Bowser's Castle is pretty difficult in a good way, so I don't mind the Rainbow Road being a little less difficult. If I had to give one other critique, I would say it's a little too long. There are 4 gliding sections that can take like 20 to 30 seconds each, and they drag out the track a lot. I also think that the water section could be taken out altogether. Not only because it's very boring, also because it makes the track longer than it needs to be, as well as being a poor representation of how cool the water sections can be in this game. The other thing I don't like about this track is that there are no parkour or rail grinding segments throughout the entire track. I really wish that they would have taken better advantage of these new concepts to elevate the track even more. Although, I think I would be more okay with this if they bring back GBA Rainbow Road for DLC and interpret all of those bouncy mechanics that were in that game and revert it into rail grinding and wall jumping. That would make this track being less difficult more satisfying. We're now into S tiers, and these are tracks I can't help but play every time I boot up this game. At the bottom of the S tier, we have DK Spaceport. I'm so happy that Donkey Kong finally gets a track that isn't a mountain or a jungle. Not only that, but using the classic Donkey Kong 75M stage with a spaceport similar to the ones that Elon Musk launches was a great idea. This entire track is like Baby Park on steroids. Throughout the entire race, all 24 players are crammed into small sections with 7 laps of perfectly escalating hazard. Each lap and every level has something unique about it. One is nothing but grind rails, another allows you to jump between multiple grills, multiple walls, and the final lap makes you dodge giant barrels from a robot Donkey Kong. It's just immaculate theming and a perfect escalation of the barrel hazard throughout the rest of the race. Everything about this course, from the theme to the hazards to the gameplay, is top notch. The only reason it's not higher as far as the route goes is that it's still kind of simple. For the most part, you're only making slight left or right turns in the long straightaways. And while they fill those straightaways with tons of cool stuff to mess around with, it is still a straightaway at the end of the day. In 6th place, we have Dry Bones Burnout. It's another one of those tracks that makes the idea of multiple routes and expands it to its highest potential. Every part of this track is an alternate route, and it's insane. There's one section where you'll be driving on parallel roads, but if you ever fall off, you fall onto another road, and this happens several times between several layers. Every part of this course can be tricked off of or grinded upon, and it's amazing. I also love how the second half of this course, all you do is ride on the back of a giant fishbone enemy. On top of that, all the Mexican theming adds greatly to the bony wasteland aesthetic that they are going with for the Lava World track. I especially love the ending portion where if you can stay on the highest route possible throughout the second half of the course, you have a chance of jumping off certain walls to be able to glide on top of the finish line and start the next lap above the rest of the racers. It's a track that takes great use of the new way the lava works as well. The best example of this is over the gliding section in the fishbone's mouth. In this section, if you get hit while gliding and you have a speed enhancing item, you still have a chance to get back on the road without ending up in last place. All in all, this is a fantastic track with great theming, fantastic music, and an immaculate execution. In 5th place, we have Wario Stadium. Finally, it has returned. Wario Stadium was usually regarded as one of the worst tracks in all of Mario Kart from the N64. In that game, it was far too long, it looked extremely bland, and without the ability to trick off the bumps in the road, it made the dirt bike arena aesthetic feel unearned. But now, between the addition of the tricks, 24 players, rail grinding, and rail grinding mechanic, and now between the addition of tricks, 24 players, and parkour abilities, it makes this track feel all the more amazing. This is another one of those tracks where if you play out your jumps correctly, you can basically avoid the ground for the entirety of the track. There's so many walls and rails and mud pits that you can use to do incredible stuff. The theming is also so much better because it actually looks like a real stadium now, instead of a bland mud pit. If I had to give any critiques to this track, I would say that if you miss a section to get on top of the rails and start doing parkour stuff, the rest of the track can seem a little bland. But for the most part, you should be able to stay on them without much trouble. Also, the music, while fantastic in its own right, personally never fit for me with this track. In the N64 game, they gave multiple tracks the same music, and this theme was also given to Luigi Circuit and Mario Raceway, both of which have come back in their games, so at least in my head, I always associate the music much more with a circuit track than a dirt bike stadium. Again, that's not to say that the music is bad. Far from it, I actually think it's very good. I just feel like there are other stadium music that they should have used that would have made the track feel even better. Although I wouldn't necessarily blame this game for it, that's more of a problem with the original. In fourth place, we have Shy Guy Bazaar. Now, this is a fantastic remake. Shy Guy Bazaar on the 3DS was always one of my favorites from 7 for no other reason than the theming. The track itself always had a great layout, especially for the Mushroom Cup, but the Arabian Nights theme always sold it for me. But with the ability now to make the Bazaar section much more fun to race through, just elevates it even more. If you go online and look up shortcut demos for this track, it is insane the type of stuff you can do. I genuinely think from what I've seen that you can hop on to the rail directly to the right of the starting line and continue to wall ride and grind on rails until the point where you have to get to the glider ramp back to the starting line. You don't even touch the ground throughout the entire thing, and it's insanely cool. I'm not that good at this track, but I definitely want to get there someday. It's also another track that's elevated spectacularly for the day and night cycle. The original track was always raced at night, and it still looks great there, but racing this track in the day makes it look even better. I also love how they changed the track to be Daisy's castle from the fictional kingdom of Sarasaland. If you drive in free roam, you can drive throughout the entire castle, and it's really cool. The music is also incredible. I can't place it any higher because the last 3 tracks on this list are just that good, but still, it's a fantastic showing for this track all around. It might go up higher once I get the tricks down, but we'll see. Taking the bronze, we have Bowser's Castle. Finally, an actually unique Bowser's Castle. Bowser's Castle themes are always one of my favorite in Mario Kart, and while they are a few of them I don't like, I didn't have much affinity for the Mario Kart 8 version of this track because it felt that it was way too dark inside. The track had no real reason to stand out with a gimmick or something like that. But I think that this track nailed it on both fronts. Along with being one of the best looking tracks in this game, there's so many unique gimmicks in this track that cannot be found anywhere else. For starters, it has the speed enhancing sections like I mentioned earlier. The lava sections return, and the entire thing looks far more like a factory that you race through rather than just simply a castle. There's nothing wrong with the castle aesthetic, but it's nice to get something else that actually feels like it fits the aesthetic. I love how much creativity you have just even at the start of the race. You can either choose to go directly right and grind on top of the chains to ride to the top, which is a food court for some reason, or you can drive through the middle, which is a laboratory that has grind rails as well. After these sections, you are launched into a giant storm filled with lava and lightning. It's very reminiscent of Cloud Top Cruise from Mario Kart 8. Every part of this track, from the music, to the difficulty, to the spectacle, is all nailed and it's easily one of the best tracks in this game. And the best Bowser's Castle to exist by far. And our runner-up is Toad's Factory. This was easily going to be in my top 5. It's one of the best tracks from Wii. It's not come back in any capacity since then. And the parkour elements of this game just elevate what is already an almost perfect track. For starters, the visuals are greatly enhanced compared to what they were on the Wii version. The Wii version didn't look bad necessarily, but there's clearly a lot more life fleshed into an HD console than the Wii could ever produce. Every section of this track is filled with consistent decision-making chaos. I especially love how they add the girders that are lifted by cranes that you can grind upon and skip half the mud section. It's done especially well because it's a risk-reward system in that when you jump off the second girder, if you're landing somewhere where the boost pad is not open, you have to go through the last section of the mud without a boost. I do think that it's a good change. However, the two nitpicks I would say about this is that, for one, The ending section needs to be a bit longer. You can't just cut through it with one mushroom, and the final jump feels kind of pointless. When in the original, it can mean a make or break moment, but this is more of an issue with the game's physics overall rather than an indictment on the track itself. In first place, we have what's become one of my favorite tracks of all time, and that is the remake of Dino Dino Jungle from the GameCube. This track was always one of my favorites in Double Dash, but it's just made so much better here. There is nothing wrong with the original, but it takes what the original had and elevates it to its highest potential yet again. For starters, one of the complaints that everybody had about the original is that for being called Dino Dino Jungle, there's only one dinosaur that you interact with throughout the race. There are a few moments that you've seen more in the background, but only one that really makes an impact on your race. But they fixed it here brilliantly by making you interact with several different ones throughout the track. When you drive through, you'll interact with a Brachiosaurus no matter what in the section leading up to the cave. But on the first lap, you can trick off of a Triceratops. On the second, you have to dodge a Brachiosaurus' feet as it stomps through the course. And on the third, you have to dodge a T-Rex that's breaking out of its containment. All of this perfectly escalates to make for a chaotic race. Oh yeah, and the theme is also awesome because it's been changed. Yes, this track has been completely overhauled to look like Jurassic Park, and it's awesome. Half of what used to be a cave was turned into a laboratory to breed dinosaurs. And the second half, which used to be the cave, is now reminiscent of the aviary from Jurassic World. The entire track is enclosed with electric fences that have all been torn apart by the dinosaurs. I love the Jurassic Park movies, and getting to race through that in a Mario Kart course is just so much fun. And while we're on the topic, here's a quick summary of my thoughts on the franchise. Jurassic Park 1 and Jurassic World 1 are really fun movies. I'll sit down and enjoy them anytime. The others I'll turn on in the background as white noise while I'm doing something else, but that's about it. So that's my list. What do you think? Are my opinions based or do you disagree? Let me know in the comments below and stay tuned because if this video gets 20 likes, I'll make a cup ranking soon. I'm very excited to do that if we get enough likes because the cup format is far different from any other Mario Kart game before, so I expect it to be extremely fun. Thanks again so much for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe.